I say we reward those that are here on time. What do you think?
Here.
So I'm going to give Chuck an introduction here. I'm Mike Hathorn. I'm the president of the board of directors, or excuse me, chairman of the board of directors for CNU Utah. CNU Utah is a local chapter for the Congress for the New Urbanism. And the Congress for the New Urbanism, if you're not familiar with it, it's a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to making the design of cities, towns, and neighborhoods a part of how we respond to complex societal challenges, realizing their full potential to expand the social, economic, and environmental opportunities available to all members of each community. And then what we do as a local chapter is we try to calibrate that to our conditions locally, regionally, at a state level. That's what we work towards. I owe some thank yous to a list of co-sponsors. This event, we're very, very grateful to have Chuck here, but it took the work of multiple organizations to make this happen. So I want to make sure that I pay respects and credit to those that helped with this. Our co-sponsors of this event are APA Utah, Mountain Association of Governments, Wasatch Front Regional Council, Urban Design Utah, ULI Utah, and Laura H. Miller Real Estate. It was a collective effort, and we're I mean, clearly there's interest in Chuck's message, so we're grateful he's here physically with us tonight. Now, let me pay respects to Chuck here. Chuck is the president and co-founder of Strong Towns, which is also a nonprofit entity. If you're not familiar with Strong Towns, you really need to be. I'm assuming you are by the fact that you're here. Strong Towns is a very important organization to me personally. Strong Towns, let me read part of their mission. Their mission is seeking to replace America's post-war pattern of development, the suburban experiment, with a pattern of development that is financially strong and resilient. I would like to think of this evening as a small homecoming for Chuck. CNU held their international conference in Salt Lake City back in 2013, and Chuck was one of our keynote speakers for that. So we're glad to have him back on Utah soil. Do you remember that?
Do I remember it? I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was my 40th birthday. Like, I turned 40 that day. Yeah, don't boo that. That was 11 years ago. So those were the good old days.
Yeah. Chuck is the author of 3 books, of which I've read all 3. I'm a groupie. Book 1, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild America's Prosperity. Second book, Confessions of a Recovering Transportation Engineer. And his third book, Escaping the Housing Trap, which is the subject matter for this evening. I've read the book twice, and I use it as a reference manual. My professional work is tied very heavily to residential real estate. So I view it as a very, very critical book to understanding the position that we are in within the housing market today. It explained a lot of things to me, laying out the history of our housing market, which explains why we're in the predicament that we're in today. So if you haven't read it yet, I would encourage you to do so. It's a phenomenal book. At the conclusion of Chuck's remarks, we're going to allow for some Q&A. I'm sure questions are going to come up as you're listening, and I want to give anyone that wants an opportunity to ask a question to be able to do that. and we want to reward great questions. We've got a few copies of Chuck's book that we'd like to share. We hear a good question, we want to reward that. So keep that in mind. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Chuck?
Yeah.
It's all you know.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. First of all, baby, awesome. Thank you. It is astounding to me, and it means a lot to me, and it's very humbling to recognize that it's a Friday night, and there's lots of other things people could be doing. And so I'm going to do my best to make this a worthwhile experience for everybody. I do want to say before I get started, I can't tell you how many people yesterday, as I was going around doing stuff, and then today, as I had multiple meetings, people who asked me, how do you know Mike? And I'm like, I have no idea. He's just always been there. Strong Town started as a blog back in 2008. And the thing about a blog in 2008 is that there weren't that many. And we were a rather like small niche group. But there were a bunch of us who were, I'm going to say, trying to find answers to problems about cities, growth, development, how are we doing this? And those people, that group of, I think, kind of early leading edge thinkers, kind of coalesced in a few spots. Mike was obviously one of those. And so if you go back to the early comment sections on the early articles, you'll see back and forth with Mike and other people and me. And really what this was us trying to figure things out. I'm the person standing up here giving a talk tonight, but I think we should recognize that there's a lot of people who have contributed to the dialogue and the conversation and the insights that go into Strong Towns. Mike is certainly a huge part of that. And it's an honor for me to have you make this all possible and invite me, and for all of you to be here tonight and have Mike be a cool part of your community. I have to say, can I say? Yeah, I'll say this. This is not pandering. It's a good way to start out. The only state that I have ever seriously considered moving to is this one. I do feel like, I mean, I've traveled to every state now. I've given a Strong Towns talk in every state. And, you know, there's a lot of very beautiful places in this country. Quite frankly, every state has something beautiful about it. And I think if you scratch the surface a little bit, you'll find a lot to be impressed with everywhere. Whatever your 50th of 50 states is, I recommend you go there and check it out, because you will be surprised at the beauty that is there if you look for it. But there's something about the culture of this place, the people of this place, the conversation, the dialogue of this place, that reminds me a lot of Minnesota, where I'm from. We have a thing that we like to say about ourselves, Minnesota nice. And I forget your version of it, but it's something along those lines. And it's a cultural aspiration that we don't always live up to, but we hold it anyway as an ideal, that we want to be pleasant people, nice people, kind people, generous people. And I get that same feeling when I come here. So thank you very much for your generosity. Are we in a housing crisis? Yes. When we ask people this question, what we get is that answer, right? We get the answer, yes. But when we follow up and say, all right, to address this housing crisis, what needs to happen to housing prices? The answers diverge, right? Some people say prices need to go up. Some people say prices need to go down. In fact, there was a Newsweek article last year that came out that attributed about a 50-50 split to those answers. Now, this might be shocking to some of you, because it's likely, and I think most of the people who show up to our talks and our conversations are on the side that prices need to go down, or at least are sympathetic to the idea that housing is too expensive, needs to be more affordable, we need to do something to rein in prices. You might be shocked and surprised to realize that there's an equally passionate group that is saying no, to address this housing crisis, to address the problem that we have now, prices urgently need to go up. We have two different housing conversations going on in our country. One conversation is around housing as shelter. And in this conversation, we point to things like homelessness, the difficulty of people getting into homes, ever-increasing rents, as the problems that are at the core of kind of this tension throughout society. The other conversation is about housing as a financial product. And in this conversation, the tension is over things like interest rates, mortgage-backed securities, the solvency of banks, the solvency of our financial system, and whether or not we're going to be able to see growth and wealth creation and prosperity broadly throughout our economy. I'm going to tell you that in my estimation, where I'm sitting here, I think it's important for us to recognize, if we are in one of these conversations or the other, that the other one is going on, and that in broad speaking, that generosity or that good intentions exist in both of these conversations. This is not a conversation of greed versus the exploited, or good people with good values versus people with bad values. These are people with two different sensitivities to two very real things that are going on in our country today. In one of these conversations, housing prices must fall. In order to make housing affordable, in order to make housing attainable, in order to get people into homes in a way that does not stretch them super thin, that allows them to be secure, we need housing prices to fall, and in some ways fall dramatically. In the other conversation, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. Because if housing prices fall too much, our banks will fail, our financial system will fail, there won't be money in the ATM, there won't be food on the shelves, there'll be widespread unemployment, and all kinds of very, very bad things will happen to regular people. Yeah, they're over here. You're good. We at Strong Towns, it's interesting today because I had conversations with multiple different people, some who work at the state level and some who work at the local level. At Strong Towns, we focus on cities. We focus on mayors, city council members, local leaders, people who live in cities and deeply care about them. There is a pervasive feeling amongst local leaders, inside and outside government, of helplessness when it comes to housing. We all have these studies that say, here's how many units we need to satisfy the demand, here's how many affordable units we need to meet the criteria in our community. How many are we building? A tiny fraction of that. In my hometown, we are moving heaven and earth to do a new housing development that is going to create 12 affordable units. And I'm telling you, when I say move heaven and earth, we're getting a federal grant, a state grant, a regional subsidy. We're doing tax increment financing. We're waiving development fees. We're doing everything possible to get this thing built. It's going to have 80 units. A dozen of them will be affordable. When you look at our plan, our housing analysis, it says we need 3,300 units. There's a feeling of helplessness at the local level when we look at the size of this problem and the ways that we are going about solving it. What I want to do tonight is to have you recognize this trap. The trap of housing as shelter and housing as investment. The idea that they cannot be both things simultaneously. Housing cannot be an investment asset that continues to go up in price, yet remain affordable to people. If we are going to break out of this trap, if we are going to escape from this helpless feeling, we have to recognize what is going on in the system, and we have to, in a sense, at the local level, commit to a different set of responses than what we're using today. I want to talk about how housing was financed before the Great Depression, because I have found that very few people understand this. Most people think that we've always had 30-year mortgages, for example. A 30-year mortgage is not a naturally recurring a naturally occurring product. This did not evolve out of nature. It was artificially created to solve a problem during the middle of the Great Depression. If you were to buy a house, say, in the 1920s, you would have financed that house through a local bank. That local bank would have drawn on the savings of your friends and neighbors and allocate a portion of that to you. Because this was a hyper-local transaction, the terms would have been very, very different. First, they were going to require a 50% down payment. They were only going to lend you 50% of what that home was worth. That product would be financed over a short period of time, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. And at the end of it, you would pay interest only. At the end of it, it would roll over. You would either pay it down, pay it cash off, or you would roll it over into a new mortgage, a new product. Local banks could not take long-term interest rate risks. Local banks could not subject themselves to volatility in the market. And so they had to be able to, in a sense, exit the product at regular intervals, renegotiate the terms, so to speak, so that they didn't squander your savings and your savings and your savings subsidizing your house. This is how housing was financed around the world for ages and ages and ages. The Great Depression changed this, and it changed this for some very fundamental reasons. One of the things that we saw right away in the Great Depression is that housing prices started to drop. And when housing prices drop, when the home value is less than what you paid for it, when your 3-year, 4-year, 5-year loan comes due, the bank will lend you in that rollover less money. Do you see the problem? You've been paying interest only for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And now there is a difference between what you owe and what the bank will lend you. That difference you need to come up with in cash. During the Great Depression, when we have 25% unemployment, massive levels of dislocation, and really the most difficult economic conditions this country has ever faced. A lot of people couldn't do this, and so what happened is they got kicked out of their homes. They could continue to make the payments, they could continue to make those interest-only payments, but the bank was not going to roll that loan over. And so they were foreclosed on, they left the house, and the bank would sell the home. What happens when the bank sells the home into an already declining market? It pushes down prices even further. What does that do to the next person that has to roll over their loan? It makes their gap even greater. And the cycle goes on and on and on. Economists call this a deflationary spiral. There was a downward spiral in home prices that were driving more and more people into foreclosure. And so lots of people who had jobs, had savings, continued to work, were willing to make the payments, were unable to stay in their homes through no fault of their own, just because of the way the macroeconomy was going. In the first days of the FDR administration, one of the earliest things they started to tackle was this deflationary spiral in home prices. The first thing they did is they went to banks and they said, hey, don't foreclose on anybody. If you get a loan in this situation, sell it to us. The federal government will buy it. And then what the federal government did is they turned around to the homeowners and said, would you like to stay in your home? Here's what you've been paying. If you continue to pay that, we will turn this thing into a 12-year loan. And instead of paying just interest, we'll have it be interest in principal, so you can actually pay it off over time. We'll spread out those payments a little bit to make it easier for you. Ultimately, that 12-year loan became a 15, and then it became a 20-year loan. The federal government continued to kind of extend those payment periods. The federal government then went to local banks and said, hey, we want you to do a lot more lending. Instead of requiring a 50% down payment, why don't you only require a 40% down payment, or a 30%, or a 20%? And we know that creates extra risk for you, so what we will do as a federal government is we will provide insurance against default. So if you do have a default, you still have that 50% skin in the game, we will insure the rest of that. The federal government also created an agency, Fannie Mae, Fannie Mae would buy mortgages from local banks. So if local banks had a product, they could sell it off to Fannie Mae. They would go through and say, all right, if the borrower meets these certain criteria, this would now be a qualifying mortgage, and Fannie Mae will purchase those mortgages for you, so that if you ever run into a situation where you need the liquidity, you want to write more loans, interest rates have risen, and now this is a bad investment for you, the government will take that loss. The government will take that thing. We will purchase it for you. These steps and others created a situation that ended that downward spiral. And I'm going to say, and let me back up here for a sec to say this very clearly. I wrote this in the book too, and I think this is an important point to make. In the context of where we were as a country, as a context of where we were as a society, I think it is hard to argue that this was not a moral thing to do. There were people getting kicked out of their homes, getting displaced, that had done nothing wrong, that were making their payments, that were on time, that were current, that were doing all the prudent things that we ask people to do. This stopped that downward spiral and allowed people to stay in their homes. When we ask people today, what got us out of the Great Depression, the answer is, World War II, right? I just want to put a note in that observation. Our culture, our country is dominated by economists and economic thinking. Because only an economist would say that the cure for economic depression is global war. Yet everybody says that, right? Like that's the thing that we got our mojo back, right? We were in a Great Depression, and now happy times are here again, World War II. That is a messed up narrative. But nonetheless, that's what we're all taught, right? GDP was low, jobs were low, unemployment was high, things weren't working, and then all of a sudden, the world gets in a global war. We can sell all this stuff to Europe, and then bam, we're attacked at Pearl Harbor, and now we've got war on two fronts. Draft millions of people, now they're employed, put millions of people to work in factories, now they're employed, the economy's growing, everything is great. Yes, people are dying. Yes, we've rationed gas and sugar and butter and everything that you might want, but hey, GDP is growing, so life is good. Around FDR, as the war was coming to a close, the economists started to panic. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, one of FDR's closest economic advisors. He said, were the war to end suddenly, there would be ushered in the greatest period of unemployment and industrial dislocation the economy's ever faced. When the war ends, there is nothing different from our economy today than there was 10 years ago. And when we bring home all these troops, when we shut down all these industries of war, what's going to happen? We're just going to go right back into the depths of the Great Depression. That is what their biggest fear was. Is that what happened? Of course not, right? We know what happened. We took all of that industrial might, all that capacity that we had, all the wealth that we had, and we poured it into creating a new version of America. And what we found very quickly is that all those tools that we had created in the housing market to stop housing from going down worked really, really well to make housing go up in price. And to make housing, and I'm going to use this word that they would have used in the day and that we still use today, to make housing attainable for more and more people. If we extended payments out over a longer period of time, more people could afford a home. If we lowered the down payment, 30%, 20%, 10%, 5%, ultimately to nothing, we could get more people into more homes. If we provided more mortgage insurance, if we lowered interest rates, if we made it easier for more people to borrow more money, we could get them to pay more for housing. And we could juice this economy in a way that would grow and grow and grow, and create jobs, and create employment opportunities, and create all kinds of wealth and prosperity, building a middle class and creating what, after World War II, was kind of the 2 decades of American history that we still nostalgize today. This was ridiculously successful, at least for the first couple of decades. For the first couple of decades, we saw tremendous, tremendous growth. This is the Case-Shiller Home Index. What this is an index of home prices over time. What you are looking at is 1945 up until 2007, the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. What we see is that in the decades immediately after World War II, you had a little period of volatility in home prices, and then you had this long decline. That long decline is a period of time where we expanded all of these financial systems. We started to figure out how to build homes. We had Levittown. We had copies of Levittown. We started to figure out how to build suburbia over and over and over. And as with any endeavor done at scale, the prices became less over time, right? I had an economist last night kind of try to school me a little bit on the economics of housing. And her core argument was that, look at widescreen TVs or look at cell phones. We make them more efficient and they grow cheaper over time. I had a different take. But the reality is that she was right in those first couple of decades after World War II. We became better at doing this and prices started to go down. What we saw, though, is that this investment in housing and the way we were growing our economy created inflation. It started to create these bubbles. And when the housing market starts to do this, starts to go up, starts to go down, banks get into trouble. Not to get too deeply technical into the banking side, but I think this is an important thing for us all to understand. If a bank is collecting deposits from people, which this is a little bit quaint compared to what we do today, but this is how banks used to work, right? They would collect money from people and then they would lend it out. It's not how banks generally work today, but that was how they worked back then. The idea was, if we bring in deposits and we have to pay 5%, what we want to do to make money as a bank is lend it out at 7% or 8%. That difference in interest rate is the money that we're bringing in. That's our profit, right? We're taking all this risk and doing all the underwriting and all the things that we do. But the problem is that if interest rates go up, which is what happens when inflation goes up, when inflation goes up, interest rate go up, people are going to demand more money for them to lend it to you because the money is losing value every year. When interest rates go up, that spread goes away. If you're collecting 8% on your loan, but interest rates go up to 9%, you have to pay 9% in order to keep your depositors. If you don't pay 9%, your depositors will leave and go to a different bank that will pay 9%, and then you're out of business. If you do pay 9%, you're paying more than what you're bringing in interest. And so what happens when we get inflation? We get housing prices go up, and we get banks starting to fail. We experienced that in the last year. This is what happened at the end of the 1960s. This is what happened in the 1970s. And what we saw was this kind of back and forth where housing prices would go up, the economy would start to go bad, housing prices would crash. We push housing prices back up again, housing prices go down, they start to crash. We had the S&L bubble shortly after that, which was really again, response to a banking crisis. And then after the S&L bubble deflates, we create quickly another bubble that ultimately became what we today call the subprime bubble. These are, in a sense, a series of banking crises resolved by having housing prices go up and up and up. Why housing prices? Because with every iteration of this, what we see is that housing becomes more and more central to our economy. In the 1980s, we actually went to banks and said, if you want to hold mortgage-backed securities, which is a bundling of different mortgages, if you want to hold a security that represents a slice of a payment for many, many different mortgages, if you want to hold that on your books, so long as it's rated AA or higher, we will count it as good as a US Treasury note. And so banks all across this country have as their reserves your mortgages. That is what secures, in a sense, our entire financial system. What this means is that these are primarily financial products. We think of them as shelter because this is where we live. These are the places that we go visit our friends in. And yes, these places do serve as shelter, but primarily today in our economy, these are financial products. And let me just make clear, these are fantastic financial products. You can go build single-family homes, kind of customized to individuals, that you can see all the checklists that we've created to be able to take those mortgages, sell them off onto a secondary market, have them purchased by bundlers who will buy up a whole bunch of mortgages, package them together, slice them up into securities, sell those individually as if they were bonds unto themselves. Those things are then bought up by pension funds, by hedge funds, by banks, by others. Often they are bet against. Often there are derivative products made out of them. In the 2000 to 2008 bubble period, we actually were so desperate for mortgages, we created these hypothecated mortgages, which is like a phantom mortgage that represents the actual performance of a different mortgage. The same thing goes with these large apartment buildings, the 5/1s. Those things we can build in markets all over the country, and they are, in a sense, a standardized product. You can have them at this level of affluence, or this level of affluence, or this level of affluence. But the reality is they check a whole bunch of boxes, we can package them together, and they perform, in a sense, like a set of standard products. These are really, really successful financial products. In fact, let me tell you this little story. 3 weeks ago, I was in northern North Dakota on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. We have a member, a friend who invited me to come and spend a couple days up there and learn about life on the reservation. And one of the more fascinating things to me is he brought me to the latest development. This is a place, 144 square miles, 6,000 people. So extremely low density. Guess what their newest housing development was? It was a 5/1. Why would you build a 5/1 in the middle of nowhere? I mean, it was literally like 4 miles from town, in the middle of nowhere. Why? Not because the local demand is there, not because this is like the preferred product in the marketplace. You built it because it is easily financeable. There's a financial market for this product. We all have to reckon with the notion that the question isn't what is the product. The question really is who is the product. At the end of the day, what is being bought and sold here, what the prices are actually based on, is not what you can afford to pay or what the supply and demand dynamics are in your local market, although that is a factor. The primary driver of housing prices today is what value your future income stream has and how that can be turned into this kind of bundled note. In 2008, we hit the peak of the subprime bubble. And I want to emphasize that word bubble here for a minute, because I think we all have a consensus, economists certainly have a consensus, that this was a bubble. When we look back, there's no one who's arguing that, well, this wasn't actually a bubble. We call it the subprime bubble, economists call it the bubble. We might call it, mortgage crisis or what have you, but we all kind of have a consensus that's a bubble. So what is this? This is where we are at now. And I think there's a certain fog of war aspect going on. When we listened to people in 2000 to 2008, there were a lot of people saying, in fact, in our book, I quote some people who in 2001 were writing, hey, we're in a huge housing bubble, housing prices are elevated. In 2001, I mean, this is way before like the big run-up. They were saying housing prices are way too high. I remember that period of time between 2001 and 2008, all of the people explaining, including the chair of the Federal Reserve, housing is not overheated. Housing is not in a bubble. Housing might be a little frothy in some markets, but there's nothing big going on here. Now we look in retrospect and say, yeah, that was a big, big bubble. Today, if you listen to people in the financial markets, they're saying the same thing. Oh no, it might be a little high, it might be a little frothy in some places, but the overall market is very, very sound. Yet we are many, many multiples in aggregate above what any metric would say is affordable. How do you recover to a bubble condition? It's kind of an absurd assertion. And so what we see today is that families at all income levels are stretched thin to get into any kind of housing that they can afford. And it doesn't matter if you are someone who is seeking housing. It doesn't matter if you are, at what price point you are looking at what part of the market you are investigating or chasing after, you are going to feel squeezed getting into housing. Housing is now broadly unaffordable. I want to make an assertion to you. It might have been a moral policy during the Great Depression, and it might have been part of an overall economic strategy that served us well at the end of World War II. But as we sit here in 2024, the idea that we're going to make it easier for people to borrow more money, to pay more for housing, is an absurd one. This is not the answer to any problem that we have. And the idea that, 2 weeks ago we lower interest rates, and if you listen to the financial news, oh, this has made housing, more attainable for people, because now with the same payment you can buy more home. With the same payment now you can pay more for the same house. The idea that, we should take, instead of having a 30-year mortgage, now develop a 40-year mortgage as a standard product, because we can take that same payment and spread it out over a longer period of time, allowing you to pay more for the same house. If you listen to people explain this in financial world, they will use words like attainable, affordable, get people into homes. If you actually look at the underlying product, what it is it is just a longer period of claim on your income stream. This approach has driven housing prices higher and higher and higher, and made homes more and more and more responsive to financial markets than to local supply and demand. If we want to break out of this trap, we actually have to get off this part of the treadmill and recognize that we're not going to solve this problem merely by allowing people to borrow more money. I said that these are financial products. I want you to think of them on a distribution of capital. This is just a standard bell curve. Don't read too deeply into it. What I want to point out is that there is a lot of money, a lot of liquidity in our system designed to build and sell and mortgage this type of product. There is ample liquidity available. If you want to be a single-family home builder and you just want to go build these things over and over and over, you will have no problem getting financing. You'll have no problem selling your product. If you want to go build 5/1s, if you listen to those people, they will say the hardest thing is getting the permits and getting past the NIMBYs and going through all that. The easiest thing is getting the financing. We can get the financing all day long. It's very easy to do. There is a ton of capital being pushed on these two financial products. If we go to the wealthy end of the spectrum, right? Rich people do not have a problem financing homes. That is kind of self-evident, but I think it's important to say. There is a niche market here for very, very wealthy people, and they have no problem financing their home. In fact, I had a woman last night arguing with me that no, local banks hold 30-year mortgages. And I'm like, no, they don't. They do not, that's like a really bad, risky product. They don't do that. And she finally said, yes, they do. They hold jumbo loans. And it took me a while to kind of piece together exactly what she was saying, because I've worked with a lot of banks. I'm not going to say that I'm like an expert on banking, but I am aware of like the risks of holding a long-term note on your books, and how banks like really don't want to do that, especially if they don't have a safety valve, which they would not with a jumbo loan. A jumbo loan is basically like you can think of as a really big loan to a really rich person. Why would a local bank hold such a product on their books? It took me a while last night to figure this out. I left the event like thinking about this over and over and over, and I finally I know why they would do that. Why would they do that? Someone give me a guess. They want the customer. Thank you. I'm sure you were getting.
Hold it above.
They want the customer, because the fascinating thing about being very, very wealthy is that very, very wealthy people have a lot of debt. They also have a lot of assets. And the thing is that they're comfortable taking on debt because they have a lot of assets. And they're able to use and leverage that debt for all kinds of things. And so I want you to hold my 30-year jumbo loan, and in exchange, because I don't want it to go to a secondary provider and all that, I want you to do it this way. And in exchange, I will bank at your bank. I will put my millions from my business or what have you, I'll run it through your bank. A bank would do that. But they're not just gonna hold your 30-year mortgage. They don't, that would be an absurd thing for them to do. Where is there no capital in this system? There's no capital at the very low end. There's no money out there to do these kind of products. Now, you can go get a home equity loan. You can, borrow from someone outside of the banking system. But these are things that either people are loath to do, find cumbersome to do, or are just like cost prohibitive to do. There is not a very liquid market for stuff at this entry level. And the entry level homes are the things that we desperately, desperately need. This is the kind of house we need. Not the house. We need the part of the house that someone would be willing to rent out. I use an elderly woman as an avatar for this, but I mean, you can substitute anyone. I actually met someone last night after the talk who was bussing tables. She was listening in, and some of the financial economists there didn't have many questions, but she had a lot of questions. She came up to me and said, hey, Chuck, I'm getting divorced. My divorce is getting held up because of the house. I can't afford to buy the house. But we can't really roll it over. It's got a low interest rate, and like I'm kind of stuck. Is there any way that this product you talked about, where we take one of the extra bedrooms, because I got like 4,000 square feet, I don't need all this house. Is there any way to take part of it and rent it out as an apartment? And I said, not today. Think of a person who has lived in a house for a long time, has a lot of memories there, is reluctant to leave. But they find themselves, for whatever reason, living alone. They are house rich and cash poor. The house needs a new roof. The sidewalks need the snow shoveled in the winter. Someone needs to mow the yard. The person is looking at this going, like, I can't stay here. I can't afford to be here and do the things that I need to do to be in this house, but I don't want to leave. This is my home. This is my neighborhood. I go to church up the street. My friends live here. I don't want to go live out there in the place that I can move into. What is wrong with that person taking one of those spare bedrooms, putting an exterior door on it, putting a little kitchenette in there, and renting it out as an apartment? Well, I'm saying what is wrong with it, not what prevents it. What is like the moral cultural problem we would have with this? If you look back in human history, people did this all the time. All the time. It was very, very common. In fact, if you went to a city 100 years ago and you were going to stay there overnight, you would really have three options. Option number one would be in the really high-end luxury hotel. every major city had high-end luxury hotel or numerous high-end luxury hotels, and that would be where like the very wealthy people would stay. Then you would have like the bar saloon place, which maybe would have a flop room or something like that. But most people would walk down the street and find someone who had a little bed and breakfast sign out front because they had a spare bedroom and they were, again, house rich, cash poor, and they would rent it to you for a night. And you would show up at 9 o'clock at night and give them a dime or a nickel or whatever they were going to charge you. They would let you sleep in the bed, and then in the morning they would give you a little bit of food and send you on your way. What moral obligation do we, or what moral objection do we have to doing this? And if we look at this scenario, I mean, look at the elderly woman who wants to stay in her house. I mean, I will rent out my bedroom to you. Now I have an income stream out of something that is just an asset sitting there. I will lower the rent a little bit if you'll mow the grass and shovel the sidewalk. I need someone to take me to the grocery store once a week. I've fallen and I can't get up. Can you come help me? Do you see how there's a financial aspect to this transaction, but there's also a very human part of this transaction that we would all, as a society, benefit from? Today, what's our answer for this woman living in this house? Well, yeah, you could sell your house and we'll move you into assisted living or some type of senior complex out away from other people, right? Or you could get a reverse mortgage and we could slowly take your wealth from you while allowing you to live in this house unless you sign the wrong one, and then we'll kick you out after a little bit of time, right? Because these are very complicated financial products, right? You could get a home equity loan. Sure, your husband worked at the mill for 30 years to pay off this mortgage and you had a big party celebrating when you did, but go get a home equity loan and do this. These are not real options for people's lives. This is a backyard cottage. Stop calling it an ADU. An ADU sounds like a disease that people catch. We don't want to give people ADUs. We want to give them housing. We want to give them cottages. We want to help them live somewhere. Backyard cottages, the amazing thing is that the highest proliferation of backyard cottages that I have ever experienced are in the wealthiest communities. It is only in, yes, it's only in middle class and poor neighborhoods where we don't see these. In wealthy communities, they build these all the time. Because they've got the mother-in-law who they want to take care of but is going to have their own space. They've got the kid who's like failing to launch, right? And they're going to let them live at home for a little bit. They've got really, really expensive property and they want to cash flow it a little bit and they've got some room in the backyard. The amazing thing is that when we look at this and we look at this transaction, this is really unoffensive to people until we start talking about who is in it, right? If we went to people and said, hey, my mother-in-law, who is elderly and a little bit sick and needs taken care of, is going to move into the backyard and we're going to convert the garage into a housing unit. Do any of you have a problem with that? Most people in the neighborhood are going to say, well, of course not. Like, yeah, take care of your mom, right? But if we said someone else's mom is going to move in there and live, everybody loses their minds, right? If we say, like, my kid who's, between jobs and kind of struggling is going to inhabit the garage here for a few months while they go through a divorce and get their life on track, you guys know him, like he's been fine. Instead of staying in the bedroom, he's going to stay out here and give him a little bit of autonomy. No one's going to have a problem with that, right? I mean, that's just life. But if you rent to, like, the college kid in the same exact situation, or the person going through the divorce, or the woman who's escaping the battered marriage and let her stay there for 6 months while she figures out her next step in life, these things become really, really difficult. We can bridge this gap by talking about these differently. This is a backyard cottage. And the type of person living in there is a very normal person, like you and me. This is a starter house. Again, stop calling these tiny houses. There's this like fetish that some people have over tiny homes. We're gonna create a little cluster of tiny homes. Aren't these tiny homes cute? Stop building tiny homes. Stop talking about tiny homes. These are starter homes. Starter homes are the base housing product that human civilizations have built for thousands of years. 400, 500, 600 square foot homes. Something sized to be affordable for people. And guess what the great thing about a starter home is? It is literally the start. A lot of people will buy a starter home and then save up a little money because they have a little extra money because they didn't overextend to get into a house. And when they save up money, they'll put an addition on the back. They'll have a kid and they'll add a second story. We can go to your historic neighborhoods here in Salt Lake City and find all kinds of starter homes. But a lot of them are not going to look like starter homes because they've started small and now they've been added onto and added onto and added onto. If you know what you're looking, you can see that starter home in there, right? But it's not what the house is today. It grew and expanded. How many of you would like to live in a 400 or 500 or 600 square foot unit? There's a handful of you. How many of you have at some point in your life lived in a 400, 500, 600 square foot unit? Yeah, check that out. When we don't allow this product in our marketplace, when we don't facilitate it in our marketplace, when we can't create it because we can't finance it, we can't make it work, what we do is we raise that first rung of the ladder high to a point where a whole bunch of people don't participate in our society or can't fully participate in our society. At Strong Towns, we talk about 3 things that we need to do to escape this housing trap and to create not only a plethora of these entry-level type units, but to actually stop that volatility and to make our local housing market more responsible to our local supply-demand dynamics. The first thing we need to do is code reform. We actually need to fix the way we regulate housing. This is the most urgent one, and I'm going to talk about it more in a second. The second thing we need to do is cultivate an ecosystem of incremental developers, people who are actually ready to go out and do this work. And then the third thing we need to do is finance this type of housing locally. We actually need to set up the systems and the mechanisms to create liquidity in the market so that people who want to build these entry-level units do not have to go through a lot of financial pain in order to take that step. We need to make it really, really easy for them to do. Let's talk about code reform. At Strong Towns, we have a saying, no neighborhood can be exempt from change, but no neighborhood should experience radical change. When you listen to the housing advocacy conversation, you very quickly run across the term NIMBY. NIMBY as the not in my backyard, the kind of avatar of the selfish, evil person who is going to oppose anything good and decent and moral that you want to do, strictly for selfish and defensive reasons. I understand how some people reach. Let me say this precisely. I understand why some people look at the NIMBY mindset as the obstacle to overcome, as like the thing that is ruining our cities, ruining our places, ruining our economy, stealing opportunity for people. I understand how people get to that point. I also understand a lot of the NIMBY objection to the way we build our cities today. What we have to do, if we want to make building housing not a niche thing that happens here or there, not a thing that we're going to fight a huge battle and get something here, and then we'll fight another huge battle and get something here, but never enough to actually scale to the size of our problem. If we want to get beyond that, we actually have to frame what we're doing in ways that benefit the people who are resisting it today. We have to recognize the things that they struggle with, and we have to frame our solution in terms that will be palatable to them. That is hard for some people to do because you've been in those meetings where those horrible, ugly people get up and say nasty, nasty things. I know, I've been there too, I empathize. But we are about changing this system. We are about changing this culture. We're about changing this conversation. And you won't do it when that 43% of people who say housing prices need to go up are 95% of the people who are going to show up at your council meetings and run for council. It's just not going to happen. When we say, let me go back to here again. I put these 3 pictures in here. This is my hometown. And if you've seen the original Curbside Chat or read my first book, you've seen a narrative about this. The idea that cities historically grow organically. They grow like complex adaptive systems. If you think of a culture growing in a petri dish, they grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and then thicken up over time. This is the style of development that our cities need to become financially productive, to become successful, to become great places to live. We need to change our zoning codes, our building codes, our regulations to allow, by right, by kind of instantaneous approval, the next increment of development intensity, everywhere at all times. And we get in this argument sometimes at Strong Towns. We have people who get a little bit frustrated with us. Let me provide some clarification for people here. If you live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory friction for that neighborhood evolving into a neighborhood of duplexes and backyard cottages. Like, no regulatory friction at all. When we look at, today I spent some time, I might go out there tonight again. I've got to leave super early tomorrow morning, but I wanted to go out today. I just didn't get a chance to get some photos and do a video by some of your transit stops. Yeah. I feel like this is, I write about this in the book, specifically for people who say, but Chuck, we have this transit stop. We've invested $1 billion, and it's just a parking lot. Shouldn't we build a 5/1 there? Let me answer that, because I think that's a fair insight. First, you should have built a 5/1 there before you built the transit. What you did is you changed the underlying economic dynamics of that land without any mechanism to actually make it into something. And so you created a lot of land speculators who are just going to sit there and wait for everybody else to do the heavy lifting. And you created a lot of kind of misplaced demand for parking. I was at like your state fairgrounds next to my hotel. What is the name of my hotel? Little America. There's a transit stop that way and that way. The one has like a huge parking lot across the street. Those things are your like mismatched anomalies. I would not sleep at night if I ran your city, as long as those places were not like really intensely developed. And the idea that, we should build single-family homes and then duplexes and then build the heck out of those places. You've already screwed it up. Try to fix it now, right? But when we look at the broad swath that is Salt Lake City, we need to have this approach be a thickening up over time. We need to get our neighborhood mojo back, in a sense. This type of thing, where we go from a neighborhood of single-family homes, again, not on a transit line, not in a key location, just a random neighborhood, and we upzone it dramatically, it feels like a certain amount of progress. Look at all the units that we're creating. But what we actually do is 2 really destructive things. The first one we do is we dramatically increase the underlying land values, inviting speculators and slumlords to move in and occupy this neighborhood and be that next property that will get that huge leap. The second thing we do is we price out everybody who is there, who would like to love that neighborhood, do something positive in that neighborhood, make something happen. There's a grand bargain amongst housing advocates that I want to give voice to, because I think it is the wrong grand bargain. The grand bargain that a lot of housing advocates push for today is the idea that we'll let all of you NIMBYs keep your neighborhoods just the way they are. If we can pick on this person here and utterly transform their neighborhood. If you will all agree to that, this disenfranchised neighborhood over here is going to get all the density, and all of you can just stay home and be NIMBYs and don't oppose us. That is what a lot of housing advocates call the grand bargain. We don't care about as much. You're kind of disenfranchised. You're not going to show up to the meeting. You're not going to complain. You're not going to be heard. And in exchange, all of you don't have to change at all. Let me give you a different grand bargain. Where we have made these disproportionate public investments, like your transit stops, we're going to have, in a sense, some catch up to do in those places, no doubt. But for the vast majority of the city, the grand bargain is your neighborhood needs to evolve and change, but not be radically transformed. Every single neighborhood in the city needs to be open to the next level of development intensity, the next level of maturing, the next level of stuff. There is no zero. There is no stasis. But in exchange, the grand bargain is we won't have outside capital come in and prey on your neighborhood. We won't have the single-family homes torn down and become 6-story condo units. We won't have your neighborhood utterly transformed to the point where it's not recognizable to you. We actually need to build great neighborhoods, great places. I feel like this is what you are expert at, right? Like we need to thicken these places up over time. This is the grand bargain we need to have. For local governments, here's the standard that we've set for you. In these neighborhoods, if I want to build the next increment, if I want to take that house and convert that 5th bedroom I've got to an apartment, if I want to build a backyard cottage, if I want to take a home and make it into a duplex, if I want to build a starter home on a lot, if I want to do that next simple, easy thing, I should be able to show up at City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed application. I've got my fee, I've got my forms, I've got everything set up, and I should be able to walk up by noon with approval and start building. That is the level of regulatory friction that we can tolerate for this first increment of building. Thank you.
We're very far from that.
We are far from that. We don't need to be. And I'm glad you said that, because I was going to move on. Let me throw something out to you. There are a lot of people who look at our zoning codes and say, these zoning codes need like radical transformation. They need a complete rewrite. That they really were born out of the 1920s and 1930s. They kind of percolated and then came into being really fully formed in the post-war era. They're designed to build the next version of suburbia, and what they do is they lock cities into place with archaic codes that don't allow this adaptation, don't allow growth, but we really, really need to fix this system. I'm with you, amen. We can look at instances around the country in cities of your size where they have tried to do massive code rewrites. Let's fix it all at once, let's do this, and they almost always fail. They almost always end up either A, getting defeated while everyone has put in 3, 4, 5 years of time trying to get it to the point where it works, or at the other end of the spectrum, they wind up getting so watered down as to kind of defeat the effort in and of itself. I think we have to have a mindset of, if you want to build the crap that we're building today, here's the code. Go deal with it. It might take you 2 years to get an approval. It might take you 4 years to get an approval. Heck, I would pour on bureaucracy. I'd be like, fill out this form, go talk to these people. I don't really care. But if you want to build that next increment of things, all those starter homes, those things we desperately need, the things that are actually going to shift the dynamics of our local market, we need to make that as easy and simple to do as possible. We need to make it almost frictionless. I mean, my ideal would be I can apply on my phone and get, instant approval. Let me put it this way. If Rocket Mortgage can friggin' give you instant approval on the biggest purchase of your life, City Hall can give you instant approval to put in a backyard cottage. We can really do that. Not that hard. All right, let's move on. Oh yeah, Eliminate parking, just do it. Stop. Salt Lake City is such a fascinating place. You have over-invested in transportation infrastructure like everybody else, but geographically you have devoted like all this space, not just to parking, but to driving. And it's maddening to go through your city because I will look like, I took a lot of Ubers today because I had to get to different places that were like 2 miles away. So just far enough to where wearing this becomes very burdensome, especially if you're gonna go 2 miles and then be on a TV camera. I wound up taking a lot of Ubers. And the fascinating thing is that in almost every instance, it was only slightly faster than walking. It is not because you lack capacity in your streets. It's because you have a signal every block and you have like this over-indexing on driving short trips, right? Got a parking lot here and a parking lot here and a parking lot here. When I come here, you know the Esplanade in Chico, right? You've ever been? So let me just put an image in your mind. This is a huge diversion, but you guys are a very generous crowd, so I'm gonna do this. The Champs-Élysées in Paris, but before it was redone the way it is today, if we went back 20 years, what you had were stores, sidewalk, slip lanes, like you had trees, and then like a very low speed slip lane. So you would pull off and then there would be parking there, but it would be really, really low speed. Then you would have a boulevard with trees, and then you would have traffic in the middle. The traffic in the middle would, in a sense, be designed to go at speed, right? In our sense, 30 miles an hour. The slip lanes on the edge would be 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, really, really slow. You would pull in there if you were gonna park or do something like that. They've taken all that slip lanes out now, and it's bike lanes and other stuff, but that's what they had before. I look at you guys have this much space devoted to moving vehicles. Well, the reality is that if you had this much space, you could get rid of your traffic signals and replace them with traffic circles, and you would get everywhere you are going in like a third of the time that it takes you today. And you could plant that with trees and have really nice slip lanes, have great on-street parking, and really cool ambiance on your streets. I come here every time and I'm like, this could be so gorgeous, this could be so nice, this could be so beautiful, and instead, it is a car sewer of every block. Unnecessary. Start with getting rid of your parking. I know that. Just get rid of your parking requirements and get rid of your parking. Let's talk about the incremental developers. The thing about the style of housing that we need to build, and let me reiterate again, we need to build this at scale. Hundreds of units, thousands of units. We need to put a backyard cottage in every yard that will take one. We need to build this stuff. D.R. Horton is not gonna do that. Centex Homes is not going to do that. Your big construction home builders who are building 5/1s are not gonna come in and remodel grandma's house to put another rental unit on it. They're just not gonna do that. It's not a business model that works for them. The margins are not there. The messiness is off the scales. They are really, really good at the production work that they're doing. And even if they can get a couple percentage points higher return on it, it's not worth, as some friends of ours in the development world say, it's not worth the return on brain damage to try it. And so what happens is there's a whole bunch of projects that need to be done where there's really nobody to do it. Incremental developers can fill the gap. These are people who have more passion sometimes than they have common sense. They actually, the hardest thing to do with incremental developers is to keep them from falling in love with their project. Because often these are people who walk down the street and see the house that could be something more and have a vision and a dream for what it should be, but are not real savvy about the economics of making it happen. So they jump in because they're in love, right? We do silly things when we're in love, and incremental developers fall in love. The thing that helps incremental developers is having a community of incremental developers, people who can help each other. Hey, I'm having trouble financing this. Oh, really? What bank did you go to? Well, this one over here. Oh yeah, don't use them. They don't have a clue. Use this guy over here. Here's his business card. This is the one I use. I'm having trouble with my plumbing. I can't get this to work. Oh yeah, I got a great plumber. Call this guy. When you can get groups of people who are interested in doing this work together, they start to support each other. They're competing because they're in a marketplace where they're doing projects, but they're also supporting each other in a way that is self-reinforcing and tends to grow their numbers over time. How many of you have ever looked at a property, seen a house on your block, seen something and thought, I feel like I could fix that. I feel like I could take that house and convert it into a duplex. I feel like I could build a home on this lot. I feel like I could be an incremental developer. How many of these people in this room have ever pondered doing that? Look around. Look at that huge number of people. Who are these people? Oftentimes they are people who are underemployed, people who just have immense passion and are willing to take their evenings and weekends to do this. Sometimes they're people who have flexible hours and can kind of do this as a side hustle. Sometimes they're teachers who do this on the summers. Sometimes they are people who want to make a shift from being hammering nails for a big construction company and want to go do this on their own. There is kind of an infinite number of people who are ready to jump in and do this kind of work. And all they need is a support system. All they need is people telling them, you can do this. You might know intuitively half of it. The other half is scary. We can help you. We can help you figure this out. We can help get over that scary part. There's a group called the Incremental Development Alliance that is going around the country training people to be incremental developers. We are kind of working and hoping that we can get this kind of stuff into community colleges. In the book we write about South Bend, Indiana, where they actually brought this into City Hall and have trained dozens of incremental developers to build neighborhood projects in their community. But as a start, go to the Incremental Development Alliance and get signed up for their online training. There are people there who can help you. There are people there who can get you to that next step. And understand that getting dozens, hundreds of these local incremental developers is the way that we transform every neighborhood. And when we talk about the NIMBY problem, these are the people who solve the NIMBY problem. Because you know what they do? They don't show up at the meeting with a cadre of engineers and planners and attorneys and threaten lawsuits and ask for huge density bonuses. You know what they do? They go door to door and they talk to people. And they actually say the thing like, hey, we're going to build this backyard cottage for the mother-in-law here. Hey, we're going to build a backyard cottage because she's worried about getting kicked out of her house and this is a rental stream that will help her stay in there. They actually can humanize this in a way that we struggle to do with the big top-down projects. Last thing, we need to localize the financing of these units. We have a lot of small little projects that we need to do. And the way we access that capital today is really, really difficult for the person working at that level. Let me start off this whole section by saying, I don't want cities to lose any money or to really risk any money in doing this. So much of our affordable housing efforts today are about cities being the dumb money at the card table. Who is the sucker in this deal who's going to take all the risk and lose all the money? That is what the city's role is in today's affordable housing market. That is not a viable role. And if we want to build hundreds of units, thousands of units very quickly, we have to do it in a way where the city doesn't lose any money in the process. What does this look like? The first example I'm going to give you is the only grant example. But I'm going to tell you that this is not funded by the city, this is funded by philanthropy. In Oswego, New York, one of the things that they've seen, and I was in some neighborhoods of yours today that I think could really use this program, one of the things they see is that they had some struggling neighborhoods in their community. Places where there was visual decline and blight kind of seeping in. When they talk to people, what they recognize is that a lot of people love their neighborhood. They wanted to stay there. They wanted to see it get better, but they didn't have any faith that anyone else shared that belief. And so what they did is they started this micro grant program, And by micro grant, I'm talking absurdly small grants, $50, $100, $200. They would give up to 50% of the cost of something that you would do to the outside of your building, or the outside of your property. Their criteria was it had to be visible from the street. The other criteria they had is that you could not apply as a person, you could only apply as a block. And on the block, you had to have 7 out of 10 people, 7 out of 10 property owners on the block applying at the same time. The idea was twofold. One, we want to get everybody on the block out talking to each other about their vision for the future. Part of ending a bank run on confidence, as they called it, is instilling confidence in the place. And you may love your property, you may want to see it better, but you may think your neighbors don't care. But all of a sudden now, you're out talking to your neighbors, you're out having this conversation with your neighbors, like, yeah, I want to paint the house and I'd love this grant. Wow, I was looking to replace the windows. Oh, I was looking to fix up the porch. I wasn't planning to do anything. Well, would you plant some shrubs? Sure, I could do that. So all of a sudden now you have people talking about their vision for making the neighborhood better. The second thing that they tried to accomplish with this program was they wanted the transformation to be unignorable. And so in the neighborhood, imagine things blighted and kind of falling apart, and all of a sudden one block utterly transforms in a summer. Wow, what happened there? This place looks so much nicer. Now next summer, 2 blocks, bam, utterly transformed. All of a sudden, this has an effect on people throughout the neighborhood. And what they saw was that people started to take money out of their own pockets to fix their own house. People started to take their time on their weekends and their evenings to mow their yard and pick up their yard and fix the house because they saw a future in the neighborhood. You have a lot of neighborhoods in your city today where people don't think they have a future. We can arrest that and change that and get that capital that exists in that neighborhoods off the sidelines and to work, making the place better. In Muskegon, Michigan, they have deployed tax increment financing as a way to finance starter homes. When you have in Muskegon a lot that is served with city utilities, so it's got water and sewer and roads and like big city expenses there, but it has not had anything built on it for 2 decades. So this is a lot that the market has passed by. What they will do is they will say, if you will build on here a starter home, something up to, and I think it's 1,000 square feet, it might be 800, definitely in the starter home range. They're not doing this for 3,000 square foot homes. If you will build something, we will take the increment of taxes that you will pay and apply that to a 15-year loan. The way tax increment finances work is that if it's a vacant lot, you're paying this much tax, and then you build a house and now you're paying this much tax. That increment, that difference between what you were paying before and what you're paying after, they apply that as a payment on a loan. So they'll say, all right, that's going to be $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year, we can finance, $15,000 of home, whatever it would be. They then apply that to your down payment, paying down the price of your house. This has bought down housing for new startups by 20%, 25% across the board, and allowed people to come in and build lots and lots of these starter homes. In California, they have had a very aggressive push to get backyard cottages built. I think this is the one, I have a lot of critiques about California, but this is the one thing that I deeply admire about them. They have made building accessory dwelling units, as they call them, building backyard cottages as you all call them. They have made building backyard cottages really, really easy, to the point where the financing now has become almost an impulse buy. You know how when you go to a used car lot and you're looking at a car and then some guy comes out of the little building and he's got a clipboard. He's like, you like that one? He's like, if you sign here, you can just drive it home today. No big deal. We finance everybody. You can go to an accessory dwelling unit lot, sales lot in California, pick out the model you want, sign the paper, and they'll have it installed and ready to rent in 60 days. They've literally made it an impulse buy. In Minnesota, we are able to use special assessments for housing. We think of special assessments as being something that is used to finance, say, sewer and water or a road project. We go out and we build this project, it increases your property value by this much, that becomes a special assessment that you pay for on your property taxes over time. We can go out and help you put in that accessory apartment. We can help you build that backyard cottage. And when we do that, that can be financed by the city the same way we finance a road project. That bond, city can go out and borrow the money. The city can then lend it to you as part of doing this project, and the city will collect repayment on your property taxes. The great thing about this is that the interest rate is lower for you than what you would get on another market. The city can make this very liquid for the types of projects that they're trying to do. And in addition, just like with tax increment financing, if there is a problem at the house where the person defaults on the loan, the city jumps in front of all the traditional financing. In other words, if you've got a primary mortgage and then a second mortgage, and you default, the primary mortgage gets paid off first before the secondary mortgage. That's the way it works. When you have a special assessment, the special assessment jumps in front of the primary mortgage. So if there's a default on the property, the city gets paid first before the bank. This makes this type of transaction almost 100% secure for the city. In Florida, we have seen municipalities and philanthropic organizations go to local banks and say, we know that this is a product that you would normally do through a home equity loan or do through some other more expensive product. We would like you to do this in a cheaper product, and in order to make this happen, we, the city, will co-sign the loan. It's as if, you know, you're buying your first car and your grandpa has to go co-sign with you. They're not lending it to you, they're lending it to your grandpa and you're making the payments, right? We can actually do this, again, very secure way without the city taking on a lot of extra risk, particularly when we're building houses in neighborhoods where we know they're going to be rented out, we're going to see them, we're going to have that cash flow. And these can be written in a way where there are really good clawback features to protect the city. Local governments, and to an extent philanthropy, if they are so inclined, can help finance this housing revolution. They can help finance low cost, high quality housing at scale, hundreds of units, thousands of units in every neighborhood across the city. And they can do this with little to no cost to the taxpayer, with very, very little risk to the taxpayer. In other words, this is a project we don't have to get special funding for and then spend that down and then go back and get more. This is the type of thing we can do over and over and over again. As long as there's demand, we can continue to do it and continue to do it and continue to do it. This feeling of helplessness is a self-imposed feeling. It is a self-imposed feeling that comes from being part of this trap. We have to work through traditional banks using 30-year mortgages. We have to work with the big construction companies who are going to tell us the land cost is so high and we need so much density. We're going to work with existing codes and building codes and zoning codes that say, here's the 6-month, 12-month, 24-month process we've got to use to get this approved. We have to go beg permission from our neighbors, listen to every NIMBY that's going to show up and shoot us down. We don't have to live in that world. We don't have to be helpless. We actually have a lot of things that we can do to make this housing market work for us. And if we do them, it's not going to undermine the regular market. All of you sitting here with 30-year mortgages can continue to get them. All of you that want to buy single-family homes or live in apartments or build apartments can still do that. The regular market will still function. But over time, what we will see is that the market will start to become more responsive to you and to your ability to pay, and less sensitive to the overall macro impacts of the economy. This is how we stop feeling helpless. This is how we control our own destiny. This is how we get on a path to building strong towns. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I gotta say, I've spoken in a theater like this a couple other times. These are awesome venues. The screen is awesome, the sound is awesome. Having stadium seating where I can literally see everybody's face all the time is awesome. Thanks for your enthusiasm, and thanks for spending your Friday night with me. We're going to do some questions. I'm happy to do that.
Yes.
Go ahead, I'm gonna let you lead this part. So we've got a microphone up here, and I think they're gonna ask you to raise your hand, and I think they wanna give out some books as part of this process too. So there's an enticement to ask a good question.
Yeah, the enticement comes with asking a really great question. We want to reward great questions. This is fantastic. We're seeing hands pop up. Austin has the microphone. Not yet. Where is it?
Check, check.
Oh, there we go. Raise your hand really high, and the mic will make its way to you.
Please.
So my name is Eric Karan, and adore the entire conversation that you're
thank you.
presenting over here.
Adore is a great word. Thank you. That means a lot.
No, because you're talking the truth. So I was born and raised in Mexico
Yeah.
until basically 1989. We moved to the U.S. Quite a shock. I thought it was going to be like Back to the Future, and you ride your bicycle everywhere, just like Marty McFly, right?
Yes.
And then I found out that
My apologies.
I was in West Texas, and there was nowhere to walk. There was not even a sidewalk anywhere. What you're describing, the pre-World War II model or development pattern, is basically the way that I grew up in Mexico. There was no liquidity or no financing, so basically you had to come up with this, extreme 50% down payment,
Yes.
2-3 years, and then you had to refinance. Which is why you see a lot of people just do their own work and do all this stuff. I also had a Russian grandmother who escaped the Bolshevik Revolution and lived in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And she came from a culture, and what she did was she had her own house, and she built 4 little places on the front of her house. One was for a lawyer, and she would go to the local university and actually get just recent graduates and say, you can be here and start your practice for free. A lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, and somebody that spoke and read Russian would actually get a free place to be there. And she said, that way I have a lawyer at my disposal, a doctor, a dentist, and somebody that if my eyes start failing can actually read the Russian newspaper to me every day. This was only possible because the pattern of development was that she could actually go and build it. She could actually go and start making small increments to her place. So everything, I've seen it before, I understand it, and yet when I'm looking around here in Utah, I'm seeing the master plan built as a finished product type of thing with no incremental built into that, and that worries me. And so my question is, obviously the illusion of wealth is what keeps the NIMBY from, I want to keep that wealth that I just built out. I put my 30-year mortgage and I'm financing everything. I'm up to debt, and the promise is at the end of that I'm going to come out ahead of what I am in. And that's an illusion that is actually increasing the cost and the debt and everything else. How are we going to get out of that by this step unless there's a bigger break to that illusion?
Yeah.
And the realization that it's going to be hard work.
So let me try to answer that, because this always happens in Q&A, is that I get the question that makes me talk about apocalypse, and then I sound like a crazy person. So if I'm gonna try to say this in like a non-crazy way, non-crazy sounding way. If you read my first book, I actually have a chapter called The Illusion of Wealth, and I talk about this very phenomena. And a lot of what we do at Strong Towns is to say, how do we work within the existing system to get like an alternate way of doing things going? You describe this in your place, and I'm going to say this with all like reverence and adoration, to use your phrase. The reason why your place does that and Salt Lake City does not do that, or the place you came from does that, is because we are more affluent here, and we don't tolerate any messiness because we use our wealth to, in a sense, buy our way out of the problems that we have. I think one of the things about doing that, particularly when you get into this illusion, we go back to the chart that shows how out of whack housing prices are compared to what we can actually afford. And I think what you recognize is that everything that we do financially buys us more time, but has, and I think we all intuitively understand this, has a day of reckoning that comes with it. Now, I will admit, I thought the day of reckoning was 2008. I remember riding around 2008 after having done a whole bunch of work to show how cities were bankrupt and insolvent. And I remember riding around going, it's over. Like this whole thing that we've been on, this whole Ponzi scheme that we've been on, is like all gonna collapse. And it didn't. And I remember when COVID started, I thought, okay, now we're at the point where like barrels of oil are selling for like negative $20 a barrel. Like this whole is like crazy town. Office buildings are being abandoned. Like this whole sucker's going down. And it didn't. I do feel like there is underlying our economic system dramatic imbalance that if we look historically at other complex systems like this, work their way out in very uncomfortable, very dramatic shifts in style of living. Go read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. I think that is like a really good example of how this kind of plays out. I am not predicting that, and I think we have to live in a system where we do good work, whether that happens or not. But there's this part of my brain that's cognizant that we are going to need those skills today to make things better, but if things go bad, we're gonna really need those skills. So let's build them now. Let's build that capacity now. Let's get started doing good things now. Thank you. Please. I don't control the mic, so I'm gonna.
Chuck, thank you so much. It's a pleasure
Thank
having
you.
here in Salt Lake.
I used to be weirded out by signing books too. I'm like, I don't like, and now I think it's cool. So I will happily sign your book.
Please, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I brought Strong Towns too.
Oh, cool. I'm happy to.
No, my name's Grant Heyman. I'm a city planner for Salt Lake City.
Wonderful.
When you say I hope the people in charge don't sleep at night, I don't.
I don't literally mean I hope you have sleepless nights.
When I'm not sleeping at night, I'm reading your book. So, and my wife can attest to that. But no, obviously, and I'm fully on board. Fully on board with Strong Towns. Honestly, I read it front to back. I think it's really as close as we've come to something
That means a lot to
that
me.
works.
Thank you.
I've got two questions and kind of a little bit of nuance to them. My first question is, are backyard cottages a for sale product? Because in your book you talk a lot about a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
right? And I'm with it. I'm with the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for me, for people my age and for people maybe even less fortunate than I am, because I'm very, very privileged.
Yeah.
It seems like the bottom line of that paradigm shift is people my age need to be renting more. People my age, people starting their lives out need to be renting.
Mhm.
And need to accept that as a fact that you will be renting,
Mhm.
right? And it's tough because here we have this example with grandma in her large house and renting maybe a room out. Well, at the beginning of my life here, I don't need a room. I just got married. We were looking forward to having kids. We need more than just one room, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like the paradigm shift might make more sense if grandma is the one downsizing instead of us downsizing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think about that, but also,
Yeah.
what is my second question is, what is the motivation for grandma to build a backyard cottage? And
Yeah.
the thing is, I'm down with the paradigm shift.
So
of
let me
renting.
answer that.
Please.
Because I do think that the lowest friction thing we can do right now is to just get it built.
Yeah.
And there will be enough. I'm almost, and I'm saying this recognizing that this is a little bit of like the marketing brochure we're building. I'm a little bit using grandma as the avatar for something who I don't really care is in there, right? But I think to get people to buy into it, there's a certain way of talking about it and framing it. And to the point where even like, I want to do this, we're trying to get the ordinance changed. I line up 10 grandmas who like have agreed to live in these things. And I'm like, are we gonna say no to these people, right? Like, I mean, we gotta make this like very human as we're going through this. But the more sophisticated step then is to cut that lot up and make that a separate small house.
Yes.
The more sophisticated step is to actually condominiumize the little room into like a separate place that someone could own. And I do think that, you know, I didn't go there tonight, and I don't think that, but to me, like, that is where this path would lead you. And so I do think that there are probably as many instances where the widow lives in a house and would, you know, build the backyard cottage and rent it out to the young kid who could maintain the yard. I think there are as many instances of that as there would be the reverse, where you would build the little house in the backyard, and then the family would move in, and they would occupy the house, and that transaction would work in like a different way, where the family could own the home, but the other person could live there, and there would be some, you know, I've seen this done many, many, many different ways. So yeah, these are transactions that I think would flow from getting us unstuck. Yeah.
Gotcha. And any words on what the motivation to, I mean, you talk a lot about land value tax, I'm on board with that. I guess that's probably the answer. Yes, I do want to give time to.
Well, the land value tax would make your parking lot at the transit stop situation really untenable for people and would really motivate things there. It would also not punish the fixed income person who was ready to make better use of their property. It would actually reward them in a way that would be broadly beneficial.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
wish
you.
more of our local leaders were here, or like statewide. But
Yeah.
thank you so much.
I talked to some of them today, so we're getting there.
Good.
Yep. Please.
Hi, Rick 12s. Big fan of your work.
Thank you.
So I feel penalized as like a father of like young kids. So I live close to downtown Salt Lake. I love the urbanism. I take transit and bike everywhere. But I feel like I'm being penalized with worse education for my kids because in general the schools are worse close to there. And like all my peers are moving to the suburbs, moving farther away where the schools are better. And so I kind of feel like trapped there. So like, what is your advice for like, I either have to take part of the suburban experiment to have better schools, or I have to be rich and live in a nice rich enclave.
Yeah.
And so what's the solution?
I have 3 responses to that, and they're all going to be dissatisfying. And I apologize in advance. I have to say, there was a theory 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that when the millennials who love cities, when the millennials had kids, that they would fix the schools. In other words, there would be enough of them. I'm Gen X. Gen X is the small generation no one cares about. Boomers and millennials like fight with each other. They're the big generations ahead and behind us. The idea was we live, as Gen Xers, we live in the boomers' world. Like we have no, in a sense, political power to do anything because they vastly outnumber us. As their numbers now are dwindling because they're aging out, we don't get to assume any type of prominent role intellectually. What happens is that these damn millennials now are so big that like their culture overwhelms everything. They're becoming like the next boomers that we have to deal with. I thought that they would fix the schools. What they did instead is they moved out of the city. And I have people who get mad at me when I say that because they stayed, but statistically the vast majority of millennials had kids and then do what all the damn boomers said they were going to do. They said, you want us to build these little, places for you to hang out and have, your mochas and what have you, but as soon as you have kids, you're going to leave. And they all said, no, we're not going to leave. We're in the city. And then they had kids and they left. I find that like depressing in a lot of ways. I don't have an answer for the school problem. I really don't. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I think what I lack in my thoughts is like a nuanced understanding of how change happens in school districts. I have seen in Minnesota where we have a strong, strong dedication to public education. I have seen us, despite really good intentions, struggle to make positive change, particularly in our urban school districts. And I don't think that's from a lack of trying. I think that's from a bad model. But again, you combine, everything from unions to the way we fund schools through neighborhood taxation to, you know, a whole bunch of other burdens. And I really am baffled as to how to solve this. That being said, if you go to our podcast and search for Stephen Schultes, Schultis, Stephen Schultes lives in Springfield, Massachusetts, one of the poorest cities in Massachusetts. He lives right in the middle of town. He has drug deals happening outside his door. He has homeless people up and down the street a decade ago. You know, this is a really, really rough neighborhood. And he sent all his kids to school in that neighborhood. He said it is one of the worst schools in the state, one of the worst schools in the country, meets all like the negative criteria. My kids got a great education. Here's how I did that. Here's how it happened. Here's why I would do it this way over and over and over again. And I play this for my wife because, you know, my wife and I have a high school senior and a college sophomore right now. So we went through this period of time too. In Brainerd, my hometown, the schools are very, very good. The public schools are very, very good. But we had questions about where the kids were going to go to elementary school. And I played this for my wife, and she said, that's really great, and I'm inspired by him, but no, I won't do that with our kids. So I recognize that there are, you know, there's different sensitivities here. Again, I feel like the answer is something that is elusive to me, because the answer is not caring more or spending more money or dedicating yourself to it. The answer is something structural under the hood that we just haven't figured out how to do. And if I could add, I do think that, and I think I can say this here in Utah, and you will all grasp what I'm saying. My dad worked at the mill. He got hurt, went back to school, became a teacher when I was in 6th grade. My mom stayed at home with us kids. When my dad became a teacher, she went back to school and became a teacher when I graduated from high school. I had these two people in my family who were not teachers during most of my time growing up, but became them. My brother's a teacher. I've got 2 sister-in-laws that are teachers. I listen to them and I listen to what they do, and I find it impossible to imagine a future where we have good schools, where we have weak cultural bonds and weak family bonds outside of the school. When we ask school districts to overcome broad cultural dysfunction, it's really a burden that they're not set up to do. And I don't know how to reconcile that, because we can't make breakdown of the family and like lack of support systems just like magically reappear, you know, go away, and those things magically come back. But to me, those things are opposed to themselves in ways that, to me, are very complex and defy like an easy answer. My sister-in-law is now the principal at a school, and she says she has kids come every day. They haven't eaten. They don't have clean clothes. They, you know, they literally like defecate on themselves because they've, you know, are being, just really, really hard things, and the school can't like overcome those. And it breaks my heart because I don't know what to do. Anyone with an easier question?
This one might be, I don't know if it's easy. My name is Jörg Rugemer. I'm a professor for sustainable architecture at the EU. I also run my own practice, and I have a question about the time to, what can we do about timing of getting backyard cottages or ADUs built? And I'm glad that you asked that question too. So I founded a design build Salt Lake program with my students, and we built the second ADU in Salt Lake City in 2019. And it took only 8.5 months to get a 750 square foot building permit. We had to go through a conditional use permit first. That was about 4 months. And then we had to get the building permit, which was treated as if we would have also done like a 8,000 square foot house.
Yeah.
That would have been exactly the same time.
Yeah.
And as an example, in parallel, I just learned I'm an incremental developer listening to you.
Thank you. You're awesome.
It took me about 3 weeks to get a 3,600 square foot ADU in my own backyard in a different jurisdiction permit. 3 weeks
Sure.
versus 8.5 months. So what can we do about these things? I mean,
So-
I think it's a great step that
Yeah.
Salt Lake City finally allows ADUs, but to me it looked like a little fake package because the conditions to get one is so hard that people are discouraged.
So here's what I've seen other places do that are serious about this, right? Like we want to make this easy to do. Here are the steps you take. Let's first line up the things that we want to do. This is a good project, this is a good project, this is a good project. We want these things to happen. Then, literally in City Hall, there was a great zoning administrator, and we interviewed her, and I can't remember her name now, but she's from Florida. She said what she did is she actually submitted the application and then tracked internally where every obstacle was. And she started at the city council. She said, do we want these backyard ADUs? Yes, we do. We changed the code and we're not getting them. Okay, let's figure out why, internally, what we can change. And so she just submitted, like, is this what we want? Yes, okay, I'm gonna submit this. And then she found it sat on this desk for 2 weeks. Then she found it went here and this person rejected this or had this question. And what they did is they just solved in the process all of those things. Does it really need to go to the fire chief? Or is there something that the fire chief is like looking at or not that we can like make a checkbox that we can check off? Does it really need to go to this person? Or what is this person's function that they need to do? Can we get that like pre-approved? And they got it down to where you could apply and get it approved the next day. And it was literally like she went back to the council and she said, okay, this took 90 days. It took 10 days for here, 15 days for here, and here's how we're gonna fix all those things, and here's the zoning amendment to do that. And bam, they passed it. So I think that the way we navigate this conversation, and again, when I say we line up 10 grandmas when we're doing the backyard cottage code, the idea is we don't want to debate these things or have these conversations in the abstract. We want to be able to say, is this the type of home you've like built? Yes, okay, then let's actually figure out what the things that are preventing this from happening. Are these the people that you want to be able to live in the backyard cottage? Yes, then let's approve backyard cottages and get them built. When we have these conversations, the abstract, should we allow more density or not? Should we have a 800 square foot limit or a 1200 square foot limit? Should we? They become these abstract things that are difficult to get done. When we humanize them, we can start to have really good conversations that result in change. So that, to me, that's where I would start. Knock down those barriers, but discover what they are. All right, we're working our way up to the top. I think we got like 9 minutes left before we're gonna have to think about movies.
Question is, what impact do you think zoning reforms will have on housing affordability in the future?
It depends on the reforms, right? Yeah, I'll say this. I have been having, let's call it dialogue, with some of the people who are part of the California YIMBY movement. YIMBY is yes in my backyard. And I have to say, when I first heard this term, yes in my backyard, I said, that's absolutely what Strong Downs is. That's what I am, that what Strong Downs is, like, yes, like, let's go out and build stuff. I have been having dialogue with the California YIMBY people over kind of a conflict of, I think, vision for how some of this plays out. Some of this is the internal type of conflict that you have with friends, right? And those sometimes are, yeah, I mean, this is why we have Protestant Reformation, right? We have, I'm Catholic, we have internal conflict, right? Over minutia. That's why we have like 5 different sects of this and that. So sometimes those internal conflicts bleed more than the real important external ones. Nonetheless, the conflict has been over whether what is needed most is code reform or financial reform. And I think it's a false choice. I mean, obviously, I think we need both. If we just reform our codes to allow more building, and there's actually, the group California YIMBY itself is, if not as a group, certainly as individual spokespeople, have called for the abolition of all zoning. I think that if we did that, or if we really, really liberalized our zoning codes to allow as much building as, if someone wants to build here, let them build. If someone wants to build here, let them build. If we did that without changing the underlying way we finance this stuff, you will end up with fewer builders building limited projects at higher margins in ways that everybody rebels against. I think that what needs to happen is that we need zoning reform to allow very, very, very easy approvals for that next step. But we have to avoid, in a sense, saturating our neighborhoods or overwhelming our neighborhoods with capital. For those of you that have read Jane Jacobs, she actually calls this effect catastrophic capital. Is that the term? Gosh, I can't. I think it's catastrophic capital. It's the idea that, or no, it's cataclysmic capital. It's the idea that all these neighborhoods will be starved of money and resources. But this neighborhood over here, we're going to overwhelm with resources. This is a bad situation for everybody. So to me, if we do sensible code reforms and allow that next increment, the capital will get spread out over neighborhoods, and we'll see good thickening up of neighborhoods and good neighborhood growth. If we broadly reform zoning without having any thought about how we're financing this, and we really, really liberalize it, I think what you will get is a kind of hyper extension of the current development pattern, which is bankrupting us and making housing unaffordable. I actually think, and I'll say this as a summation, and Mike, you can post this on Twitter, then they'll all yell at me. I think if we listened to California YIMBY, we would get more unaffordable housing. I think that we have to have a more nuanced approach.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate the discussion. So I came up from Provo, which is a town of about 120,000 people.
Today you did. Thank you for making that trip. Thank you.
Yeah, through the terrible traffic. But so in some of the more the higher income areas, parking is a huge deal. And you said eliminate parking mandates. I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious about how you would make that message persuasive to these places, because if you do a backyard cottage, it's going to be rented to 3 students that are going to add 3 more cars out of there. I don't know. I'm really curious about that.
Well, let me answer the first part of your question, and then I'm going to answer the second one in a way that I'll preview. It may sound pejorative, but I think is actually an effective way to think about it. So the first, we at Strong Towns have 5 core campaigns. One of our campaigns is to eliminate parking minimums and subsidies. We do not think, and I think there's some very sound science behind this and some sound cultural thought too, that we should be mandating that people build a certain amount of parking. Donald Shoup's The High Cost of Free Parking is probably the best technical recitation of why this is the case. But the idea that as part of a development process, that the government should come in and say, all right, you're building a bowling alley, we have calculated that you need 80 spaces. You're building an archery place, well, we've calculated that you need 45 spaces. The way we actually go about doing this is rather absurd. And in places that have gotten rid of their parking mandates, what they see is that builders and developers kind of figure it out. Now, here's the part that I think would be a little bit pejorative, but I actually think is the way we need to be thinking about this. Right now, what we have largely done when it comes to parking is we have said we are going to be very, very sensitive to the inconvenience that people may have trying to find a parking spot close to where they want to be. And we are going to be rather insensitive to the inconvenience that people have trying to find housing that they can afford. I think we should flip those things around. I think we should be way more sensitive to people being able to get into housing they can afford and struggle with the inconvenience of perhaps having to park half a block away or a block away from where we want to be. Here, here. I think that is a less of a struggle. that's the way that I would frame it. I think that what we often do as planners or city builders is we try to pretend that there's no trade-off here. Like we can, because we have an insane amount of parking. But if we do this right, parking does become more scarce. It does become harder to find a place to park. There is then a price for parking that we can institute that people would pay. A really, really successful city charges a high amount for parking, and very few people park there because they're living in this great city where they don't have to drive everywhere. The transition from where we're at today to that will not be done without internal stress or tension. I am going to embrace the tension of having a higher cost of my time and ultimately a higher cost of my money for parking, and I will trade that for a lower burden to actually be able to get into a house and have other people get into a house. That's how I would answer that. How about two more, eh?
Hey, so I'm a student, an architecture student, and I'm actually a student of Mike Hathorn.
You're his student?
I am. He's taught me a lot.
Wow.
There's a few of us here. So,
That's awesome.
I'm working on like a personal project in Santa Barbara.
Can I ask you a question first?
Yeah.
Do you call him Professor Hawthorne then?
I call him Mike.
You call him Mike.
That's right.
Is that what you asked, Mike? Because that'd be really cool. I'd like to call you Professor. I'm going to do that from now on. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I'm working on a project in Santa Barbara and
Santa Barbara,
California.
Yeah, okay.
And they just passed this zoning initiative
They
to
did.
change the guidelines for the city, and they're all about making it more walkable.
Uh-huh.
By making it more walkable, the prices of all the housing just went up
Uh-huh.
a lot, because it's an amenity. People want to live in a walkable place.
Yeah.
So then, with affordable housing, how can we provide solutions for people who can't get that barrier to entry into a walkable community? So right now we have like government subsidies, which is largely how
Yeah.
these projects come about.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what a strong town's solution to that would be.
So, okay. California is the most, what did I call it in my first book? The most incoherent place that I've ever been. California, okay. You see me struggling. So, in the tech world, there's something, in programming world, there's something called technical debt. Those of you who do programming know it, you're nodding. It's the idea that we have created a code, and it might be thousands of lines long, but there's a bug, there's a problem, there's something we gotta fix, or something we gotta do really quick. And so we go in and we patch it really quick. We do like a quick fix, with the idea that we'll come back later and like rewrite it more elegantly. But we don't. And then the next version, we do that again, and we do that again, and we do that again. And as you do that over time with multiple programmers working on the same thing, you build up what they call technical debt, which is like a brittleness in the system. It's a brittleness that like builds up in the system. And the thing about technical debt is that it manifests in really weird ways. So you'll actually make like a very logical change to the code over here to do something, and all of a sudden it'll cause some like weird thing over here that you never thought would happen because someone 10 years ago put some little thing in there to patch something real quickly. Am I right? I mean, this is how this stuff all builds up. I feel like what California is technical debt manifested in a land use pattern. You start with the post-war pattern, which in California started ahead of everybody else. California was suburbia manifest, right? If you go out east, you see these established cities that built suburbia around it. California had tiny little nothing. They just tore it down and they just built solid auto-based infrastructure. They saw huge gains and growth from that. The reason they started first, like before Texas or Arizona, is you didn't need air conditioning in California, right? You could actually live in a very hospitable place earlier than you could in other parts of the country. So you had this massive amount of growth there. And then you start to see all the like negative effects and all of their patches to build it, a patch here, a patch there. Prop 13 is a patch, right? Like, you get to the end of the first generation of this suburban expansion, and all of a sudden, all those roads need to be fixed. All of that pipe needs to be fixed. All those pumps need to be replaced. And then all the cities said, holy crap, we gotta raise taxes. And everybody flips out and says, wait, you can't raise taxes. And so you get Prop 13. You can only raise taxes so much a year, no matter what happens. What do cities do then? Cities say, okay, we can't get our money here, we gotta build more out on the edge and get our money that way, because that will generate free cash flow and do this. So you see these like really weird, like massive things going on in California. Well, we got all this smog, we got all this congestion. It's like one little patch after another, and I could go through like a long litany of them. I feel like the stuff that California just passed a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. And I'm like, it is another patch on a patch on a patch on a patch on a patch in a dysfunctional system. This picture is in San Diego. And I wrote about this the first time in 2013, I went to San Diego and gave a talk. I did a tour of California, and I gave a talk in San Diego. And I had been to San Diego a couple times as a tourist, but they took me to like the neighborhoods of San Diego. And one of the things that was so like bizarre to me is that you would be going down the street and it would be single family home, single family home, single family home, 20-story tower, single family home, single family home. And I'm like, what the hell happened here? And they were like, we don't know. You know, like someone just built that. And I'm like, well, what is the land worth? Because the land is worth vastly different amounts if you're building a single family home or if you're building a 20-story tower. What's the land worth? Well, I don't know. It's a function of like who could buy it, who knows the council member, who paid this bribe, who sat through 5 years of this meeting to get that. I'm like, well, that makes none of this is predictable. None of this makes any sense. None of this is rational. I can't price this. I can't finance this. I can't insure it. Like, what is this? This is crazy land. To me, that is what California is. So when you say they passed this thing to make the neighborhood more walkable, and like the next day, property values went way up, what is that? Like, I don't even understand that. Because I know they didn't go out and build a bunch of sidewalks and corner stores and make the neighborhood beautiful and walkable. So I don't feel like I have an answer for you, except to say that if you're gonna work in California, California does play by like a different set of rules. And they're not clear to me what they are or how they work. The outcomes of them seem rather random. And if we had a vote for California to secede from the Union, I would probably vote yes. And I love California. So, but it's just, it's not a place. I guess the one moral from the story I would say is, there's a saying in economic circles that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. The world is downstream from our economy. So when our economy is doing well, everybody in the world does well. When our economy is doing poorly, everybody in the world does even more poorly. I feel like we have tried for a long time, or California's tried for a long time, to position itself as the analogy to us. As we are to the world, California is to the US. And part of that is just their position. They are a massive state. They are a massive, huge amount of our economy. They have like tons of representatives in Congress. They are very, very influential. They are like the epicenter of a whole swath of our culture, and the way we talk about ourselves comes from California. I think it is important for us to not learn too many lessons from California. Because I do think that California is just different. It's just different. And if I were you, I would, go work there. What an adventure. I would be scared of, investing my money, but, what an adventure. I feel like other states you can learn a lot more from. In fact, I'd say there's 48 other states you could learn a lot more from. Sorry, Californians.
What's the other one?
I said there's 48.
What's the 49?
You. You, California, and 48 other ones. That's my map. Please.
Last one.
Yeah.
All right. So were there any organizations that you have learned about since publishing your book or just couldn't fit in that you'd like to tell us about?
This last book?
Help, yeah, that help
Okay.
with the housing trap.
Yes. I'll end with this one. So, a lot of what I think we need to do, comes down to how we treat each other at the neighborhood level. When I say line up 10 grandmas, make this a human thing, I'm really talking about getting out of the idea that government is something that we pay for and it's a service provided to us. The idea that cities are something that we pay someone else to build. Jane Jacobs said that cities are co-creations, they're things we build together, and I think cities work best when they're built together. I'm a Catholic. I don't start my presentations with that, but I would be remiss, and I think if you read my books, you've seen a little bit of this creep in, to say that my faith has shaped a little bit of how I view some of these things. There's an organization in West Virginia, and I can't think of their name right now, but I'm going to be interviewing on a podcast very soon. It's like a West Virginia YIMBY organization. And I came across them because I was the loudest YIMBYs in the country are from California. And I just had this long explanation about why I struggle with their conversation as applied to the rest of the country. But I ran across this group, or this group was brought to my attention in West Virginia. And they were doing a lot of the things that we tell places we should do, right? They were pushing for and had achieved a certain level of zoning code reform. They were pushing for and achieved a certain level of building code reform. They were trying to get people into homes. They were doing like the block level work. And it was very, very beautiful. And I found that the founder of this group, the group itself had, here's our mission, here's our values, and as I read them, I'm like, oh, this is very strong towns, this feels very familiar. And one of the things they said in their values is, we are not here to fight with people. We are not about antagonizing people. We are not about conflict. We're about bringing people together. We're about dialogue. We're about conversation. We recognize that we will not win by shouting you down, but we will win by co-opting you to our side, like making you be part of what we're doing. When I went to the founders' Twitter feed and other things on social media, I found that this was also like a person of faith. And it struck me that you don't have to be a person of faith to do this work. You don't have to be practicing in a religion to do this kind of work. But that if you are, it's hard not to see this as a manifestation of what, and I'm going to speak as a Christian, I know there are other denominations that would perhaps say similar things, but a manifestation of what we are actually called to do. Loving your neighbor is not an abstract thing when you actually live in a neighborhood. And loving your neighbor is not supposed to be an easy thing. It's supposed to be hard. That's why, that's why it had to be a commandment. So the West Virginia YIMBY group, and they might be called WV YIMBY, to me I find really inspiring because they have, in a place not known for embracing, let's just call it, progressive zoning reform, in a place that is generally very poor, in a place where decisions are made kind of city by city by city in a way that is different than they are the further you get west. I mean, this was part of the original colonies. You see this group that has led with a message of love and kindness and the desire to listen and the desire to kind of work together. And I just find them very, very inspiring.
What do you do when your neighbor is land banking the entire parking lot downtown because they're the dominant faith? Including the one across from your hotel.
Here's the thing. I have had a few less than casual conversations with elders, and we are all complex people. We have complex places that we start with. But I have seen a lot of love and a lot of desire to think differently. I also recognize that a land value tax would unlock a lot of that, but not for a non-taxpaying entity. So, in my church, we literally, my parish, the place I go, in the last couple of years, we tore down 2 neighborhood homes to expand our parking lot. I go to church there. I went and talked to the church council. I opposed this. I met with the priest outside of the confessional and said, this is not cool. And I didn't stop it. So, I think ultimately, if we continue to broaden this conversation, we continue to have it in ways that are sophisticated and incremental. If you all go out and talk to your neighbors and your friends and tell them about this and tell them about these ideas, I do think that we will make some of these changes inevitable. And when the church does get to the point where they say, having this big parking lot is antithetical to what we're actually called to do, I think instead of saying, you're damn right it is, what have you been doing? We say, thank you, that's a loving thing for you to say, let's find something better to do with it. I think if we have that mindset, we actually will accomplish a lot.